My go-to fun fact is that I was temporarily switched at birth. Um, you know, I really nail that two truths and a lie game because I was born on the exact day that Chernobyl went nuclear, and I was temporarily switched at birth because at the Navy hospital I was born at, I came out blonde hair, blue-eyed. My mom has brown eyes, brown hair. So there's this other baby that had a Puerto Rican dad but a white mother, and so the nurse was like, well, this baby looks like this mom, and this baby looks like this mom. So here you go. And my mother thankfully panicked and was like, I had a boy and you handed me a girl. Where's my baby? Um, so I was temporarily switched at birth, born on the exact day Chernobyl blew up. So I usually just say those two facts and that my favorite color is blue. And that's the lie, because my favorite color is red. Um, so there you go. Those are my fun facts. So my topic for today is Catholic or Christian imagination. And the reason why I chose this is because sometimes I think, especially when we look at fantasy and science fiction, we kind of overlook just how much Christian thought, Christian worldview, but just how that interacts with our imagination has really influenced some of our greatest works of fiction and our literary works, but also because the unfortunate reality with a lot of Christian movies, Christian works of art today, is they've kind of forgot that. They've become a little bit more, oh, we're going to be all preachy and kind of like we have our little pet thing or whatever. And it's like, guys, the Lord of the Rings is in our repertoire and you're coming out with God's Not Dead? I mean, come on. Come on. And it's that reality where I think we really don't appreciate just how much a Christian imagination, when you really focus not just on like, well, I'm going to make a Christian movie, but rather how my understanding of theology, how my understanding of God can play out in a work of fiction, can really create amazing worlds. And for me, the biggest example of this, and I go to C.S. Lewis, and everyone's always like, yeah, of course she's going to go to C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia. But wait, because the biggest example I think of this is actually the Space Trilogy. Now, if you've never read the Space Trilogy, I highly recommend it. It's 3 books: Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. Now, I don't think I need to put spoiler warnings on books that are like 80, 90 years old, but if you're spoiled, I'm sorry. Because Out of the Silent Planet, it came out as a bet between Tolkien and Lewis. And so they were kind of like, okay, we're going to get out of each other's wheelhouses here. And so Lewis told Tolkien that he had to write a time travel story. And Tolkien told Lewis, well, you have to write a science fiction story. Now, this is, of course, in the 1930s, give or take. So a lot of this science fiction story really draws a lot from Jules Verne and a lot of his kind of, well, today we'd call it steampunk aesthetic. Back then, Jules Verne had no idea what steampunk was, even though him and H.G. Wells kind of invented it. Now, true story, Tolkien never wrote his time travel story. He kind of got stuck on The Hobbit, and the rest is history. But Lewis did write his science fiction novel. It's about this thick. You could probably read it in an evening if you didn't have anything else to do. And the premise of it is, so we take the solar system, right? And so as far as we know, we're the only life that's out there. And we haven't met extraterrestrial life. And Lewis's idea, his thought on this is like, what if the reason why we've never met someone from another planet is because that we are isolated from the galactic community of the solar system because of the fall. That because of the fall, we're kind of shut off. And so, again, spoiler warning for a novel that is as old as our grandparents, if not older. The main character, who's a professor, who's kind of modeled off of both Lewis and Tolkien themselves, gets kidnapped and taken to Mars, where he finds Mars is not this barren red planet. There's lush vegetation. There's other extraterrestrial creatures. Angels and other spirits are communing with the life that's there. And the reason why is because of the fall. That because of the fall, we are the silent planet. We can't kind of commune. And so he writes it takes off. So he writes Paralandra. And Paralandra takes place on Venus. And again, spoiler warning. But sort of the plot behind that is the main character goes there to prevent another fall. The devil has possessed one of the villains from the first book. The Garden of Eden, life is just starting on Venus, and it goes to prevent the fall. And when we really look at that book, that trilogy, that Hideous Strength's a little bit thicker. It's kind of caps it all off, but it's a little bit more fiction than science fiction. Right? Those kind of thoughts, those kind of ideas, right? Like that whole notion of like, oh yeah, because of the fall, we're cut off from the galactic community, really comes from that understanding of our theology and our Christian imagination. Now, is it a Christian book? No, not really. But it's inspired by that. And we see that kind of writing from a lot of really some of our greatest writers of the 20th century and the late 19th century. How many of you are familiar with Father Brown? Right? You know, it's that BBC series with the Weasley's dad, right? And actually they were written before Chesterton was even Catholic. But the notion of it, right, is here you have a local parish priest who basically is also a world famous detective. And so there are theological themes throughout. It's not necessarily explicitly Christian or explicitly Catholic, but you can see it just steeped in there, you know. And there are some pot shots there, like one of the, again, spoiler warning for books that are over 100 years old. One of them, he's solving a mystery. He finds a stolen item. This manor house is actually used to be an abbey that was taken from the Catholic Church during the English Reformation. And, you know, Father Brown is just, this is not on the BBC version. They have to play a little bit cool with the Church of England. He looks at the people, it's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm glad we solved this. And he goes, well, really, the real theft is all around us. And he points to the monastery that's now this like mansion, kind of talking about just that thievery, right, of the monasteries, Catholic churches, and just a lot of that reality. But again, this is when we look at like who we are, what makes us up, and what's important to us, really steeping into just pure fiction. Now, he wrote about 50 of those. Chesterton wrote about 50 of those, and he always said, well, I'm only writing them because they bring in the money. He never really enjoyed writing them as much as some of his other works, but you know, it's kind of one of the things he's known for. It lasts, right? There's this notion, I think, today where we think, oh yeah, Christian fiction is just not going to be good. And for the most part, it's kind of true. But when we really go back and look at, well, why is that? Now you could argue, oh, you know, Hollywood or whatever, and you know, that's not really it, because the reality is you guys could write a book tomorrow and self-publish it. You know, that's just where we are. It's just, we're not thinking right? How to best use that imagination. We're like, oh, I have to preach this, be preachy and give a message. Like, no. No. You could argue that the Chronicles of Narnia are a little bit preachy. This is kind of that debate between Lewis and Tolkien that scholars have, where it's like Tolkien was real, Lewis was all about the allegory, right? Like in your face. Like by the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, if you don't know that Aslan is Jesus, then you need to reread the book because it is like literally on the stone table. I mean, you know, but Tolkien, it wasn't about the allegory, but it's about those themes that was formed by his faith and his experiences. His experiences as a scholar, his experience as a husband, his experience in the trenches in World War I. And so much of those virtues, like really what makes a man virtuous, a human virtuous, in Tolkien, really comes down to those theological realities of virtue, right? Aragorn is the pinnacle of what we are supposed to aspire to in the moral life. Now, he's not beating us over the head with it, but we can see, right, for him, this notion of good and evil is very much what we understand from the perspective of the virtues. And so I think that's something that we kind of need to go back to, especially in a day and age where a lot of our fiction, and I'll say this, like, I'm a fan of Game of Thrones. Like, I've seen every episode. Like, all right, I'm not trying to knock it. But our heroes, are they really emblematic of what the virtues are, of what a hero is supposed to be, right? Is the struggle there between choosing the right or the wrong? And so much of our modern fiction, whether it be fantasy or whether it be science fiction, we see the heroes choosing the wrong thing for the right reason. Well, we're going to go and just have the dragons destroy this whole town. It's wrong, but it's going to do a good, right? Whereas before, or an imagination really fueled by what our understanding of virtue is, would say, no, there has to be another way. It's why a lot of times you see in kind of, this is where I'm going to nerd out a little bit, and I'm sorry. I mean, I'm a nerd. It's okay. Actually, in high school, I called myself a jork because I was a jock, but I was also a dork. And so, you know, a jork, you know, because you have to have a label in high school. And that's why oftentimes people kind of get down on Superman or Spider-Man, because of all the comic book heroes that we have today, they're the ones who never, ever waver. It's like, well, Superman is boring. Batman is better because, like, he's got no problem going to the edge and crossing it. Superman wouldn't do that. Yeah, because Superman is an example, right, of, you know, what the virtue is supposed to be. And oftentimes with these characters, the ones that are the most criticized are the ones that's like the Man of Steel, right? 2013. Again, big nerd. One of the things that I didn't like about that movie, even though I liked that movie, especially because he talked to a minister when he had to make his moral choice, was he killed Zod. Superman doesn't cross that line. Even Batman doesn't cross this line. Spider-Man, so that whole notion, right? Great power comes with great responsibility. These are examples of what a virtuous hero is supposed to be that we've lost. But then you look at these great works of fiction that are inspired by Catholic thought, and you see that steeped into it. It's right. It's why there's that difference between Aragorn and Boromir, or even Boromir and his brother Faramir. I know I'm saying a bunch of nerdy things. I'm sorry, but you signed up. You signed up for this. You showed up, right? Boromir ultimately serves as an example that kind of surrogate for us, where we fall into that temptation, and ultimately he redeems himself. He has that chance to do good in the end, but it costs him his life. Whereas you see characters like Samwise, who never falters in that temptation. You see characters like Aragorn, that even with that stress. And I think that if we, right, and I don't know how you demand creators to do this, I think, honestly, more than anything, this topic is more to get you guys thinking, to think about how, when you see the media that you consume, like, oh, are there Christian themes in there? Because even if they're not explicit or even implicit, they're there. And when we can start to recognize that, then we can start to understand the virtues better again and give those example. If you've ever seen the Netflix Daredevil series, right? So, well, here's another thing. Frank Miller, who's one of the more, he didn't create Daredevil, but he's one of the more well-known writers for it. His thought was, well, if I'm going to have a vigilante who is blind, fight crimes, and also a lawyer, he has to be Catholic. It's the only way this is going to work. But so much of that character, right, his idea, what he strives for, his own understanding of how he knows that he's not perfect and he's crossing the line, kind of comes from our Catholic understanding of the virtues. It's why a lot of the very pivotal scenes in that series is him in confession or him talking to his priest. If we can understand and kind of recapture that, who knows? Because who knows if the next great work of fiction or fantasy is here? Because so much of our stories, right, are centered from things that are familiar to us. I mean, even the Jedi Order is a combination of Eastern mysticism and Jesuit priests. So do we just let these epics go, or do we read them? Now, I would say that probably at least most of the guys here have read at least one of the Lord of the Rings or Hobbit or Tolkien verse. I would say probably most of you have. If you've never read the Chronicles of Narnia, guys, really, what kind of childhood did you have? Now, I understand, right, that I am no longer a young adult. I'm probably much older than most of you. I aged out of this about 4 years ago, but I mean, come on. It also, if you've never read them, do not read them in the way that they're currently published. Like you buy a box set now and they do it in chronological order. Don't do that to yourself. There's only one right way to read all 7 books. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, The Horse and His Boy, The Magician's Nephew, and The Last Battle. It's the only right way to read those books. Now, if you've ever read the Silmarillion, kudos to you. I gave up after 2 pages. But it's not just those, I mentioned Chesterton, I mentioned Tolkien, I mentioned Lewis, because really for most of us, those are the ones we're more familiar with. But the works of Flannery O'Connor, very much steeped in her Catholic upbringing. Robert Hugh Benson, who is a former Anglican priest who became a Catholic priest, was actually very controversial because his dad was the Archbishop of Canterbury and the head of the Anglican Church, and he becomes a Catholic priest. A lot of his writing is steeped in that kind of Catholic understanding, especially a lot of his historical fiction, which kind of deals with the persecution of the Catholic Church under the reign of Elizabeth I. But even Lord of the World, which is, he's writing this in the 19 teens, early 20th century, and it's a dystopian book, kind of set in the 21st century, that both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis said, hey, you need to read this. This is a rather prophetic book. How many are familiar with Canticle for Leibowitz? A few hands. Again, Catholic convert writer, dystopian novel, but again, who is the pillar of saving sort of civilization? The church, the monastery. These themes are present. Probably many of you are familiar with Brideshead Revisited from Evelyn Waugh. Again, it's steeped in his understanding of his Catholic faith. But they're not written to be preachy, explicit Christian books. They're written to be good books. And I think that's what we really need to look for, especially if any of you are ever thinking about becoming an author. Now, I'm halfway through a book that I started writing 11 years ago, and I haven't touched it in 11 years, so it's probably never going to get finished. The theme of it is basically, what if a Hallmark Channel Christmas movie and going to seminary? Yeah. And I got about halfway, and I said, I don't have the time for this. Our Catholic worldview, our Christian worldview, our Christian understanding of imaginative thought doesn't have to be shallow, it doesn't have to be vapid, and it doesn't have to be sort of in-your-face, preachy, whatever. Like, so much of our understanding of the world, of how space works, of just good stories and character traits is steeped in our understanding of who we are as human beings in that Catholic understanding of theology. So that's what we should be looking for in fiction, and that's what we should be aspiring to write. So if you're looking for something to read, now again, there's nothing wrong with reading things that don't have those themes, because I read way too many comic books. But that's okay, because those themes are noticeable. And Nightcrawler, you almost became a Catholic priest, so there you go. Sorry, I'm way too much of a nerd. But yeah, so when we're looking at that, or even when we're looking at other things that we see or consume, don't just say, oh, well, that's this drivel. No, look to see where somehow those thoughts and imaginations that come from who we are and are part of our anthropology have seeped in. Look for the good and continue to foster it. Because even in some of these drivel, or even some of these things where they've lost the plot, we can see that shine there. But let's also not be afraid to keep those good books, not the good book, those good books going. Read Tolkien, read Lewis, read Chesterton. And not just like with Lewis or Chesterton, like the big theological stuff. Read Father Brown. Sure, yeah, he wrote Father Brown because it was a paycheck, but they're fun stories. And we can see really, especially in a world where there's just so much noise and so much confusion on what's good and bad, who's good and evil. Just know, I can understand this. We need an Aragorn. All right, I hope that wasn't too boring. So I guess now we'll go into the Q&A. I'm okay if there's no Q's, but all right.
I got a tough one.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a scenario. So when we think of like film noir, neo-noir movies, film noir kind of situates us in an evil setting, the failing protagonist, but even in the end, he at least recognizes his error, like in Double Indemnity.
Mm-hmm.
But neo-noir similarly situates us in that environment, but there is no happy ending. There's no lesson learned, kind of like Chinatown.
Mm-hmm.
Both examples have impeccable form and storytelling and themes, but one's intention is, in a way, kind of more atheistic or meaningless. Yet we can still think of real-world events that don't have good earthly endings. And so it seems like Chinatown had that ending that it seems like if Chinatown had the ending that we wanted, where justice prevails, we kind of lose the same weight and effect that it does. So do you think these more kind of atheistic or meaningless works have value because they capture the more grim nature of earthly life, despite God having the last word and seeing justice through in the end of time?
I wouldn't even, kind of say, well, there's no happy ending or whatever, because the reality is there are oftentimes in the world where on this earth we're not going to have the happy ending. But that's the reality, is we were never, we are pilgrims on a journey. We are in the world, we're not of the world. And the reality is that on the cross, the war was won, right, for all time, but we still have those battles. And sometimes those battles are a loss. But part of the nature of that is that understanding when we see those works of arts too, it should be like, well, that kind of sucked, but like, how can I avoid that? Sometimes tragedy is an invitation for us to look as, okay, what sort of things do I need to change? What sort of redemptive things do I need in my life? And sometimes, yeah, especially with those gritty noirs, it ends up with the main character with a bullet in the back and a puddle of their own blood. But it should also make us think, well, what could he have done different? Or what could she have done different? What can I do different? So again, I'm a nerd, right? I also like pro wrestling. I've been to WrestleMania. I went with a Methodist pastor friend of mine. We should have gone dressed like this, but we didn't. But one of the things I like about pro wrestling is, so I'm going to give you some pro wrestling terms. You have the heel, who's the bad guy, and you have the face, who's the good guy. And my favorite pro wrestling stories is when you have that sort of long story where the heel begins to question what they're doing and eventually becomes a good guy, eventually turns face, eventually does the right thing. And sometimes those stories that don't have the happy ending, sometimes even life where we don't see the happy ending, it's an invitation. It's like, okay, do I need conversion? It goes to Boromir. Boromir is an example for us, right? He's tempted by the ring, but he's a character, right? He's like, I'm going to do the wrong thing, which is take the enemy of the weapon of the enemy, and I'm going to use it for the right reason. And ultimately, he crosses a line with it, causes Frodo to run away. But when faced with what he's done, he shows remorse and ultimately gives his life to save Merry and Pippin. Spoiler warning, he dies. Now, in the Peter Jackson movies, he dies at the end of the Fellowship. In the books, he dies at the beginning of the Two Towers. But I think on that, really with those, anytime, even with, but I mean, it's like the most horror movies anymore end with bad endings. When we think about, okay, what's the bad ending? Oftentimes with those, it's we're teaching you a moral. What should we learn? And how can we change in our own life? Good question.
So right now, a lot of Mormon authors seem to be popular. I'm thinking like Brandon Sanderson. How does that tie in? Is that really Christian? Does it promote that worldview? Why would they be more popular than, say, Christian or Catholic?
Well, because I think right now we don't have the same stable of Christian or Catholic authors, or they're not necessarily writing stories that compel. But I think part of the reason why those are, what is it that gravitates people to it? And it's probably those themes. And those themes are present. Those themes are universal themes that we kind of forget belong to all of us. We kind of forget that belong to us. And I think if we can kind of rediscover that and actually, because I think part of the problem is the reason why a lot of Catholic authors aren't kind of well-known or doing well, or Christian authors, because they're not writing good stuff. You have to write a good book. But yeah, I would say Joseph Smith is probably a really good religious fantasy writer. And you can quote me on that one.
Would you suggest reading like secular media at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I read comic books, but I think you have to know when something, it's like, I said I've watched Game of Thrones. I've never read the books, but part of it is because some of those scenes where you can fast forward through, are in the books. And when you look at what J.R.R. Martin looks like, George R.R. Martin looks like, and you realize he's the one writing those scenes, I couldn't do it. But I think there's a lot of good things on secular media. I mean, like I said, we can learn a lot about heroic virtue in comic books. We can learn a lot of heroic virtue from a number of these fantasy stories or fiction stories that are out there. But we just have to know enough about authentic theological realities, authentic theological virtues, to be able to differentiate between, okay, well, this is a pile of crap, or it's just like, oh, actually, this is a very good point. Or like, yeah, I wish they weren't coming from an atheistic worldview, but they are really right on what self-sacrifice means. Because I think that we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So, any other questions? Yes.
How do you walk that line of, I'm sure everyone's heard the garbage in, garbage out. How do you carefully walk that line of not getting too far into garbage in, garbage out, but also still reading that section?
Well, I think you also have to realize, though, that a lot of Christian stuff is also garbage in and garbage out. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, especially when you look at some of the stuff from evangelical Protestantism or mega churches, or heck, I want to say hell, but the prosperity gospel. A lot of that is a lot of garbage wrapped up in Christian clothing. And so part of being able to understand this, we have to understand authentically what the church teaches and why. Because if we don't have an authentic understanding of theology, then when we consume any sort of garbage, whether it be this or that, whether it be right or left, whether it be liberal, conservative, whether it be atheist or Christian, we can get lost and we can buy it. And so I think part of it is we have to recognize that garbage can be anything. But if we understand really what we believe and why, it becomes easier to notice garbage in whatever sort of label it's in. I have to be careful with my language because there's a baby.
Well, you mentioned the 2013 Superman movie. Do you like the new one better or the old one better?
I like the new one a lot because it was, well, first off, the crypto stole the show. I mean, you give me a superpowered dog and you can take my money. But I think what I really enjoyed about it is because the one thing, again, I'm going to nerddom, and this is kind of off topic. The compelling thing about Superman isn't his superpowers or that he's an alien or that he's some kind of Christ figure. It's that he's human, like the metaphysical, philosophical sense of human, right? And it's kind of the difference between Batman and Superman, where for Batman, Bruce Wayne is the mask and Batman is the persona, where Superman, he wants to be Clark Kent. And I think that's on show there, because the most thing about, for me, one of the compelling things about Superman is, yeah, he's the man of steel, he's bulletproof, but he's still vulnerable. And I think that kind of got lost in the Zack Snyder version because it was more about, gods among men rather than like the humanity of the character. Yes.
We're heading into an era where the humanity is harder and harder to find with AI and films that are placated to specific audiences to try to reach people that the feelings they want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They want that serotonin hit. They're like, this feels good. What would be a way that you would find to combat that, or just look for, like in the Superman movie, finding that humanity?
I would say, because again, it goes by garbage and, talking about garbage in, garbage out, that reality of placating your audience, it's pretty much, it doesn't matter where you fall on any sort of theological or political or social spectrum, it's there. I mean, that's why, one of the sad realities about podcasting and YouTube is it gives people a platform to weaponize anger and hate and fear, regardless of the wide spectrum of human thought. And I think the important thing is you have to understand your own humanity first. When we can understand who we are, we can understand what our identity is, especially centered around Christ. When we understand what it means to be a beloved child of God and our infinite dignity and worth, that each and every one of us are made in God's image, and what it means to authentically love God and love our neighbor, then it becomes easier for us to kind of tune that out. But unfortunately, I think that, and don't get me wrong, I like capitalism, but part of the dark side of capitalism is that people are, whether they believe it or not, if they can make money on it, they will. It's kind of what I've always said is a lot of like the LGBT stuff, if there wasn't money to be made, it would have, not gotten where it is. But it's the same thing too with a lot of conspiracy theory outrage. If there wasn't money to be made, it wouldn't have gotten where it is. But we have to understand ourselves first. If we can understand how we as a human relate to God's vision, what his plan is for us, if we can understand ourselves and that our identity chiefly as a human is beloved child of God, then we won't be as susceptible, and that garbage may still be there, but we can kind of help bring people along. But I think part of that reality where we're in is along the way, we've lost that. We've lost what it means to have that as our identity. And so a lot of this comes from self-medicating. If little by little, that mantra from Archbishop Coakley, go make disciples. If we do that, if we live our faith life authentically, and in a way that actually inspires others to turn to Christ, then slowly but surely that begins to die out, because again, there's not money to be made, then people aren't going to spend their time trying to put that content out. But I think it starts with us recognizing who we are to him.
Can I piggyback that?
Yes.
Knowing that we are sinners, and as a Catholic who obviously struggles with sin, how would you say, we went through a period of time where there was a lot of anti-heroes that were brought up as
Oh, they're still around. I mean, you just look at The Boys and it's just covered in it.
Exactly. So as someone who obviously can understand the anti-hero goal, which is that they're faulty, they have mistakes, they struggle with sin, but they're kind of aiming for something good. Looking at Thunderbolts, I don't know if you've seen that one.
Not yet, but it's on now that it's on Disney Plus. Sometimes it's hard to go out to the movies, especially by yourself, and especially because the movies are so expensive, and this is a rant for another day. It's the same thing with sports. It's why would I want to leave the house? Well, no offense to those who don't like OU football. I will always go to OU football if I have the opportunity. But for me, it's why would I want to leave my couch when I could watch the movie in my pajamas? I show up to the movies in pajamas and someone sees, oh, that's Father Will. No, I can't do that, but I can do that from home. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, you're good. So in that, kind of knowing that, I relate to Daredevil, I relate to Batman because they struggle, but they never cross those lines. Do you think that a Batman or a Daredevil is somebody that we should look to versus Aragorn, who is that, or do we need both?
I think we need both, because I think, we're not going to be perfect on this world. I mean, that's just the reality. But we need to strive for it. And so those examples are showing especially those who have the power to completely dominate but don't, are important. And I think that's the thing is you look at some of the vigilantes, I'll go back to Daredevil. He's crossed the line, but where does he end up, right? Spiritual direction. Where does he go? And I think we can learn stuff from that, because it's that grounding that we need. Because we should strive to be Aragorn, but we can find comfort in knowing that, okay, there are, it's I never understood, right, where they talk about, representation in media, and it's important to see yourself. But then every time I see a priest that's a good character in a TV show or a movie, I'm okay, I get it. I watched 8 episodes of a season of America's Worst Cooks because one of the contestants was a Catholic priest. Now, I'm not a bad cook. He was, but as long as he was on the show, I was going to be there to root for him. And I think that's that. It's I think when we can see people who are struggling but still striving for the good, that's a character trope that is found all across fiction. That's why, again, redemption stories are so powerful. But who also struggled and was not always great and 100%? St. Peter. And he was the first pope. So. All right, this is the last question.
All right, got a good one for you.
All right, but remember, sometimes you go to confession because you're my parishioner. I could give you hard penance. Actually, true story. Okay, here's something that a lot of Catholics don't know. You actually, if you think the penance is unreasonable, if someone gives you an unreasonable harsh penance, you can actually ask for a different penance. Like you have, as the faithful, you have a right to ask for a different penance. But the only time I've ever seen it done was I gave someone 3 Hail Marys. They said, Father, no. And I said, okay. I was like, okay, how's 3 Hail Marys hard? That's too easy, Father. You need to give me a harder penance. So anyways, so just keep that in your pocket. It's like you need to read the whole Bible. It's like, Father, I need a new penance.
Well, there you go. I'm looking for literary recommendations. So why don't you give me a great story to read, a great theology to read, and then a great Bible story.
All right. Great Bible story, honestly, and it goes back to your question. My favorite parable in the whole of the Gospel is the prodigal son. Because, and I should never be mad about the exaltation of the Holy Cross, but where it fell this year, it basically meant that we don't get the parable of the prodigal son for another 3 years. So, and it's like my favorite one to preach on because it really hammers home like what confession is all about. So that true contrition, that becoming alive again, that going and thinking, well, I'll just be a servant, but God, right? God is the Father in that parable, and he embraces us and we're alive again. So there you go. So that's when a good theological book, Consuming the Word by Scott Hahn. Because I think, right, one of the biggest lies that we as American Catholics have ever been told is that we are not a Bible people. And that is bull poop. It's just a load of bull. Because everything that we do is steeped in Scripture. And part of that liturgy of the Word, right? Because again, if you show up after the gospel, you actually haven't fulfilled your Mass obligation. You have to be present for both the liturgy of the Word and a liturgy of the Eucharist. We are consuming Jesus, who is the Word of God, through our hearing of that. So I would say that for a theological book, because that's kind of, and it dovetails really well with if you've ever or haven't read The Lamb's Supper, which focuses on Revelation as a foretelling of heaven and of the Mass. So consuming the Word. As far as fiction goes, if you've never read the Space Trilogy, you really should. It's very much a product of its time, but it really makes you think, because one of the questions we get asked a lot anymore is like, well, what happens if we find alien life out there? Does that disprove God? It's like, okay, well, if God created life on this earth, who's to say he didn't create life on other earths? Right? It's that joke, right, where the alien comes to Earth and they go to evangelize the alien to teach about Jesus. Like, oh yeah, I know Jesus very well. Like he comes all the time. And it's like, what do you mean he comes all the time? Oh yeah, he's like always coming down. Like we have a really good relationship with God. Like, life on our planet is like paradise. It's like, do you guys know Jesus? It's like, yeah, we know Jesus. He came once. Once? What did you guys do to him? And so it's, it's kind of that thought, right? Of, if there is life out there, it doesn't disprove God, but rather, especially, now I know a lot of times in science fiction, all the aliens look humanoid because it saves money. But, especially, right, if we meet an alien and maybe they're purple, but if they look like us, it's like, okay, image and likeness. There you go. So if you've never read it, but if you have, read the Father Brown mysteries. I mean, they're just fun. Like sometimes you just need a good detective story. Yes. Okay. I said last question, but last question. Uh-huh.
One of the books that I like to read is by Joseph Pierce. He has some multiple books, but they're basically cross-referencing the Bible and Catholic theology with the Lord of the Rings, Narnia, like all those books. He has some of the books on Facebook.
Yep.
He has themselves rather than just stories, but I would suggest Joseph Pierce is a pretty good one.
All right. Well,
Last little, just this is a joke.
okay.
What if the aliens aren't made in the image of God?
Well,
Like they're giant bugs, you know what I mean?
Space Trilogy, book 1.
yeah, because one of the main characters looks kind of like a beaver, right? You know, maybe our human state is just part of the fall. Maybe we looked, a lot different, and then just through the toil of labor of sinfulness, we became this. Yeah, I don't know. Who's to question God? All right. Okay, any last questions? Comments, complaints?
What's your favorite superhero?
That's a very good question. So I'm the oldest of four. I have two brothers, and we're all a year apart because, Catholic. And so I always gravitated towards like leaders because like I was the oldest. It's like I'm not going to listen to my little brother. So around that time, it's why Leonardo's my favorite Ninja Turtle. When everyone's like, "Oh no, it's Raphael and Michelangelo," it's like, no, it's Cyclops from the X-Men. Part of it is that leader, but part of it I think is like one of the most misunderstood superheroes because there's like he's boring and he's a rule follower. It's like this is a guy whose parents pushed him out of a plane that was on fire with his little brother strapped to the only parachute, hoping that he would survive. And little did he know, growing up as an orphan because his brother was adopted and not him, that his dad was a space pirate because they were abducted by it's. There's actually more to the character than just he's. But everyone's like, no, I like Wolverine because he's the coolest. No, Wolverine is boring and dumb. And I'm going to end on that one.